congratulations on being one of the 8 shortlisted writers for the Fiction Uncovered promotion. How does it feel?
It feels great. It's really exciting, and the more that the book gets read, the happier I am, so yeah, it's great.
So could you tell us a little bit about The Colour of Milk?
Yeah, The Colour of Milk's set in 1831 in a village, and it's about a young girl, Mary, who's 15 at the time of writing her book. It's like an act of witness, her writing the book, and it's the story of how she learnt to read and write, and how she gained literacy. She's illiterate at the beginning, and she lives with her family, and she goes to work for the local vicar, who teaches her to read and write.
Now, people live in stories, we're surrounded by them. So what was it about this story that made it the one you had to tell at this particular time?
I think I have a real interest in unheard voices. I think that there are different kinds of voices in society, and there are voices that are heard, and there are people who are entitled to speak, and there are voices that are unheard, and people who don't feel entitled to speak. And I think I felt really moved to write the story of a young farm girl who would never have been heard. You know, unless she'd learnt to read and write and told her story, it would never have been heard.
Right, okay. And how did you go about researching the details of farm life in the 1830s?
Research is a really interesting thing. You can choose to do a lot of research, or you can choose to make it up, and I decided to make it up with The Colour of Milk. If you do a lot of research, I find it bogs down writing, and you can end up with a research-heavy piece. So I like to sort of turn the tables and do it the other way, where I'll place myself there imaginatively, and then do the research in a way when I come to it. So if I hit a problem, or if I at the end of writing something, you can check and just see whether those jumps that you made, imaginative jumps, were correct.
Okay, and did you encounter any particular challenges of a first-person narrative where everything depends on that very distinctive, plain-speaking voice that is Mary?
Yeah, first-person narrative. I love first-person narrative because I'm a playwright as well as a novelist, and I write for radio, so I write radio drama. So for me, first-person is something that I feel quite comfortable with, just jumping into the mind of another person and being that person. And actually there's a deliciousness in just being that person and seeing the world as they see it.
So Mary so desperately wants to learn to read, and yet I found her desire to learn wasn't particularly motivated by the prospect of escaping her life as a farm girl, but it was the possibility of exploring other worlds through literature.
I think reading and writing, and Mary's achievement in learning to read and write, however, at whatever cost, represents 2 different things for me. One is the social and political context, that without the ability to read and write, you really aren't a person. You know, if we think about the structure of society, it's all within written language. So if we think about the history of law, if we think about politics, it's all in writing. And if you actually can't write, it's very difficult to be a full member of society and to have a voice. If you can't write, your voice is never heard. You know, the history of oral cultures has disappeared. So they disappear. The other thing about reading is, yeah, you're right, it opens this sort of beautiful, imaginative world. And Mary's life is actually tiny. It's beautiful in a way, but it's really tiny. And she knows that these magical things on the shelves represent worlds and represent stories and represent experience and other things, and she wants a bit of that. So there are whole sectors of people who don't get access to the imagination, and they don't get access to politics. So it's on those 2 different levels.
You're clearly passionate about reading and literacy, so what do you hope people take away from reading The Colour of Milk?
I think what I'd really love people to take away is to have got lost in the story. I think, you know, every writer wants their reader, I hope, to get lost in the story. But I really would love people to appreciate what they can do, and to appreciate this magical ability that we have of reading and writing, and an ability to record experience, and an ability to read other people's experience. And I think we take it for granted. It's only when you work with people with very low literacy that you realise how it affects our self-esteem.
What inspired you to write about The Colour of Milk?
The Colour of Milk was originally, it came from a symposium that the Royal Shakespeare Company organised about the King James Bible, and they invited a load of theatre makers and writers along. And we were stimulated basically for 3 days, and they threw lots of ideas at us. And I thought it would be great to write about an illiterate young girl who learns to read with the Bible. And so the idea was hatched, and yet the series of plays never happened, the commissions never happened. So I had this young girl in my head, and then realised that I was dividing up between ideas for theatre and ideas for novels. And once I realised it could be a novel, I was sort of off and running. And then the first line just came into my head. I hadn't even thought, is it going to be first person? I just had this line come into my head. This is my book, and I'm writing it by my own hand. And I think once you find a really strong first person narrator, it's almost like tuning into a radio. And all you have to do is tune in, and then you find the story as you go. And that's probably why I didn't do that much research, because I just actually needed to write it. Because once you hear a voice, it feels urgent. And of course then later, when I finished the book, and I found out what happened, because when I started writing it, I had no idea. It felt like I was honouring a voice of, I don't know, some young girl who'd never managed to tell her story. So I really felt this huge urgency. And then later, as I went through the drafts and got the story clearer, it became obvious why that urgency was there.
The Colour of Milk was a joy to read and a delight to judge as part of the Fiction Uncovered promotion. What's next for you?
Oh, I've got a lot of work at the moment on my slate. I'm writing 2 novels. I don't know quite how that happened. I'm writing another first-person novel, which is a very strong voice like The Colour of Milk, and I'm writing another novel, which I've started. So I'm sort of halfway through the second draft of the first-person novel. And I'm just about to do a workshop on a play about folk music for the National Theatre and the Bristol Old Vic, which is really exciting, about Cecil Sharp and the gathering of folk songs at the beginning of the 20th century. And I have some other projects and plans. I've got another couple of novels in my head, and a couple of other plays, theatre projects that I'm going to be working on. So there's a lot to be done, yeah.